Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of Snack Break, the perfect podcast pop on while preparing your cup of tea or ideal snack or beverage. I say bonus episode because today we are talking about one thing and one thing only. It is, of course, Stranger Things 5, the finale, because it's on Letterboxd for some reason, but hey, I am here for it. I do have my review up on Letterboxd actually. So let me warn you very quickly before we get into this episode, we are going to be going into spoilerific detail, not just with Stranger Things the finale, but I guess by the fact we're getting into the finale, we're going to be discussing all of Stranger Things as a whole, generally. It will largely be the finale, but other mentions will get in there, so just, hey, if you intend on watching the finale and haven't yet, then just don't listen to this review. I should say we are going to be discussing largely the finale. I do want to sort of go briefly over my opinions with regards to season 5 as a whole. I have to say I really enjoyed season 5 up until the finale, and I'm not saying that to give hints or degrade my opinions or experience of season 5's finale. I'm just saying I really enjoyed it up to that point. From looking at perspective prior to watching the finale, I'd been really enjoying the season at that point. I'd seen a lot of, or quite a bit of criticism online, people saying that like it's, it's too TikTok-y. They're trying to make you, they're putting dialogue in that's only meant to be clipped. It's not the same. It's that meme with the horse and like the fire horse, and then the final section is season 5, and it's just some primary schoolers drawing of a horse. Which, let's be honest, nobody can draw horses. So hey, I don't know who we're hating on here, but no, I have to say I personally find that those reviews, obviously, everybody is more than entitled to their opinion. Your opinion doesn't degrade anyone else's opinion. It's exactly what it is. It's an opinion. There is no definition of how you should be viewing these interpretational, experiential events when it comes to film and TV. So I personally think that those people are sort of missing the point of what Stranger Things is, in that I feel that Stranger Things has always been, particularly season 3 onwards, where I don't hate season 1 and 2, but season 3 onwards is really where the show came into its own for me, and I feel like it really, from that point onwards, it found a sense of identity with its mismatch, which I reference later in my review, because I do have some notes written down. I have prepared, believe it or not. But no, I feel from that point onwards, Stranger Things really comes into its own with this mishmash of horror and sci-fi and comedy and high school drama, and it's not afraid to be quite good fun. And this season once again balanced that line really well, in that it is, like, bits of it are scary, bits of it are very sci-fi, and it continues to be very 80s, and you've got great character drama, and you've got moments of comedy, and like the comedy really hit in this one. Maybe I am just broken by like TikTok humor. Don't actually use TikTok, but like maybe I am just broken by TikTok humor. But I thought there were some really funny lines in this one. Particularly, I really appreciated my favorite character, Robin, gets a lot of screen time in the first 2 volumes, and I really appreciate that. As a radio nerd, turning my favorite character into a radio DJ, always going to be a good move with me. But I do still, I still thought it was a really fun season. I thought it balanced everything quite well. One of my few criticisms of those first episodes would be that, like, just like stop trapping Hopper in places, please. I feel that for the first, can't remember if they get back in time for volume 2, but certainly for most of volume 1, I think they do. So for most of volume 1, I personally felt that Hopper and Eleven were somewhat wasted. We'd spent all of season 4 having Hopper trapped in Russia, and I have to say that was one of the few elements of season 4 I really didn't enjoy, that really didn't work for me. I sort of just had enough of him being beaten up by Russians to a point, and it really just felt like an unnecessary remnant of season 3 almost. I love season 3. Season 3 is my favourite season, as you can probably tell by this point, because I do feel the show comes into its own at that point. But it felt like just an unnecessary remnant of a plot line that couldn't quite be wrapped up within season 3, and it just like it sort of degraded my experience slightly of season 4, which on the whole I still really, really enjoyed. But yeah, on the whole, really like those first 2 volumes of season 5. That would be one of my few criticisms, that like they wasted Hopper out a bit. But on the whole, some really great character work. Robin gets a lot of time. The Robin-Will relationship is good fun. I like how they handled Dustin and Steve's relationship, and like that was obviously quite painful for the audience to watch, but I think that was sort of the point. And you know, it's a good test. They really made us feel something, but they didn't drag that sort of angry Dustin out for too long. And so I thought that, yeah, good 2 volumes. So the finale is finally here, and I'm entering my review of the finale at this point. So the decade-spanning, cultural-defining, D&D repopularizing, and like, thanks Duffer Brothers, you really helped us nerd out on that one, sci-fi horror comedy glorious mismatch has concluded with a finale episode with a length worthy of its letterbox position. But did it stick the landing? On the one hand, I do think yes. This finale delivers epic moments aplenty, with gargantuan fights, dimension-hopping escapades, and several edge-of-your-seat, please don't kill Steve, moments of pure adrenaline. And I know later I'm going to talk about the situation with deaths in this episode, and it's something I've heard a lot of criticism about, and I do buy into that slightly, but I couldn't have handled them killing Steve. So just thank you for not killing Steve. And that fails to mention how, amidst all of this, the characters are still given their due. And the show continues to balance the bizarrely wonderful concoction of 80s science fiction, Stephen King-esque horrors, and high school comedy drama that is maintained since 2019's somewhat less somber season 3. In terms of rankings of seasons overall, I probably would say season 2 is my least favourite. It was just quite depressing on the whole. We had the search for Will was over, and it spends a lot of times just like it really is full horror, which isn't totally my issue with that season. I've got needle phobia, and so you know, I don't deal well with hospitals, and they spend a lot of that time around needles and in hospitals or versions of hospitals or hospital-inspired locations in that season. So, season 2 at the bottom, then probably season 1, then season 5, then because I like season 5, but you know, season 4 definitely gave us a bit more, and I felt they handled characters really well on the whole across season 4. But certainly, it did still feel like there was a lot going on. It really is. Season 5 really is a season 4 part 2, which I know sounds obvious, but with regards to the plot, it really is just the second part of season 4. And for that reason, you're straight in with a plan. There's obviously the Henry Creel mystery, which I think is played out really well in the Mr. Watson mystery, which is played out really well at the start of this season, I think. But beyond that, there's really no mystery, and everybody sort of knows what's going on. We're down to the plan. We're executing and exercising the plan. And for that reason, you know, it's straight in full intensity from that onwards. And that does lend itself not quite so well to character moments. You're not getting quite so much character time in there as you maybe did in season 4. So for that reason, season 2, season 1, season 5, season 4, and then season 3 at the top. All that being said, however, it's difficult to ignore the nagging sense that there are some seemingly pretty major flaws with this finale, which, spoiler alert, does feel as though is one of the weakest finales of the entire show. A fact disappointing considering its almighty responsibility to not only serve as an Avengers-style endgame, but to also offer a rousing farewell to those beloved Hawkins high schoolers. And I think I am going to go into some criticisms here, but it's so important to remember that the Duffer Brothers and Netflix and everybody on the show had so much to handle going into the story at this point. And you can criticize the show as a whole on that. There were a lot of characters going in, but there was a lot to wrap up. So, you know, I think you've got to bear that in mind to a degree. The thing is, this finale, exciting and action-packed as it is, ultimately feels at times as though it fails to commit. Throughout the majority of the 2+ hours, we are constantly teased with the death of well-rounded characters that have enjoyed expertly evolved storylines across the course of 5 seasons. This is often used for dramatic effect, such as with the seeming death of one particular Steve the Hare Harrington, but largely causes the episode/movie/emotional rollercoaster to feel as though it never quite has the nerve to deliver the all-important, if brutal, punch in the gut. A phenomenon perhaps best described with the fact that the show fails to even commit to the killing of a character who has only appeared in a few episodes. One of those episodes amongst the least popular. I personally don't understand why they couldn't have just killed Callie. We watched Callie die, and then from my we seemingly watch Callie die, and then from my understanding at least, it was sort of suggested that, like, what, was she just joking with 11? Like, she was bleeding to death. You know, she was bleeding to death. Like, I guess you could say she became unconscious at this point, but then had the energy to wake up and just like do some like upside downy magic-y stuff. What? Like, I felt they could have at least killed Callie. I'm sure there's Callie fans out there, but you know, like, sadly they are in the minority. I don't hate Callie as a character. I think Callie's a good character overall and does serve a role. And although I think that they had to do something to wrap her character up, and throwing her in here was a good move in the sense that they had to make something of, let's be honest, what is a bad episode in season 2. Adding Callie did complicate things further. It was another character to be dealing with, but I still just feel like they could have at least killed Callie. That feeling of not having the nerve to kill off big characters, I feel like Callie's the easy kill here. From my understanding, that she's only been through so many episodes. Again, just my opinion. But there is then, of course, the 11 debacle. After what poses as a Tony Stark level sacrifice, can you tell I like Marvel? The show's longtime protagonist is revealed to be alive. Maybe. Again, we don't know if 11's alive or not. In my personal viewing experience, I struggle to believe that they even killed off the character in the first place. A sense of numbness that was only furthered by them than saving her. Again, maybe saving her. She could be dead. I can't help but feel that if the show really couldn't bear to kill one of our original group, then perhaps allowing for Nancy to kick the bucket would have offered a devastating mid-episode kill that would have only further heightened stakes, all whilst allowing for 11 to survive. I have to say, if I was, going in and magicking some, rewriting this somehow, I don't know. But let's say, were I to restructure the plot, I think I would have killed Nancy off at that point, and then that would have been a really crushing kill because, they didn't even kill Ted off. That's another thing. Sorry, outside of the finale, when the Wheeler mum has her moment with taking out the Demogorgons. Obviously, that's really good in a way because she's been a character who's sort of had a slow burner of, I guess you could call it an arc. I don't know if it is sort of an arc. She's had a slow burner. Character portrayal across the seasons, and she sort of got her big moment when she saves Holly at the start of season 5, and so for her to then deal with the Demogorgons, that's really cool. That's a really good move. And then she's saving Max, who saved her daughter, which is really lovely. It's nice, but it would have been so funny if it was dead. It would have been so funny if they hadn't even alluded to how it was happening. Didn't even have that shot looking at the gas canister. It could have been Ted. It could have been so funny because, they didn't even kill Ted off, which, Ted's a hilarious character, and I think with the whole Target Stranger Things out there, the Duff Brothers have clearly really realised that, or Netflix, or who was in charge of that particular marketing deal. I just think Ted's a hilarious character, and they've clearly realised that, and they're utilising him. But nobody asks, is Ted alive? Nobody's that worried about if Ted lives or dies. So I just thought that was quite funny. But anyway, sorry, I got really distracted there. But yeah, I think Nancy could have died. It really, again, they sort of repeated the whole Steve tease. But I think Nancy is an amazing character. I really, really like Nancy. But Steve is Steve. Steve's a legend. And I do feel it still would have been really impactful to have killed Nancy at a point where realistically she was going to die. And I just felt that doing sort of the Steve near-death thing again within a relatively short time period, it just felt like, it felt like a bit of a tease. So ideally I would have killed Nancy there, and then you could have switched things around. So Steve and Jonathan, it would have been really crushing death ultimately, and then Steve and Jonathan could have done their reflecting thing then. Extra motivation for the final fight. Final fight could have been a bit longer then. They could have dragged that out a bit more, and then you would have... I know, obviously you'd have to massively restructure things here. I'm just making suggestions, but you wouldn't... 11 could have still sacrificed herself, because ultimately we find out that she maybe doesn't really. So I do think a Nancy death would have been necessary. And then if the Duffer Brothers really didn't want Eleven to survive, they could have just had her survive outright and had that be, she could have still done the potential sacrifice thing, but then after that Nancy death, they could have fully revealed that no, she is properly alive. We know this isn't interpretational, this is what the show is saying, this is for sure. That being said, as much as I found much criticism of the final 45 minutes, I personally found them delightful, with the exception, of course, of my aforementioned issue with the whole 11 situation. After a show that has provided hours upon hours of character development, offering 3/4 of an hour to tie up most of the loose ends really didn't feel like a massive problem to me. Of course, not everything is dealt with. The whole mysterious red infinity stone that a young Henry discovers raises, I think, more questions than it actually answers. And biggest issue with this episode, to be honest, we never find out if Robin and Vicky get their pudding at Enzo's. Look, I'm not one of these people who believes that there's like a full bonus episode out there where there's like a Snyder cut. I think that's very unfair that people are going out and, like trying to get a Snyder cut out of this. I personally don't believe that there is one. However, I would be shocked if there was not a version of this show where we find out, we get a shot of Robin and Vicky having their pudding at Enzo's. Like, come on, you've teased this through the whole season. And I think that would have given me, like, Robin got a lot of great time this season. I was so relieved when they didn't kill her off. And she sort of got her moment with, like, the final radio thing. She got her little sort of radio guest return. She got her moment on the balcony, not the balcony, the roof of the Squawk. But I thought that would have been nice. They could have panned around at, like, just, if we just had, maybe that was Enzo's where Joyce and Hopper proposed. You could have just panned around as Robin and Vicky sort of smiling and having their pudding. Nice. So maybe they just cut that out for time issues. I personally would find it a bit strange that, like, they've teased out the whole way through and nothing happens. It's not a big issue. I'm mostly joking to some degree, although I would have liked to have seen that, but it's a small issue. In all seriousness, though, the Stranger Things finale is generally a pretty great example of how to wrap up a show. Their dedication to continuing the stylistic blends of the 5 seasons, offering a largely satisfying big boss showdown and basically giving every major character a worthy send-off is a massive win, although it's just a shame that the final roll of the 11-themed dice will likely remain such a divisive one. I really do think, although it was, it was cool. It's cool to a degree that it's cool to a degree they're leaving it interpretational. I can see the thinking there, but I think it's a bit of a controversial move, and I just felt like after 5 seasons, I do personally feel a more definitive ending would have been nice. There's also that whole theory that, like, it's all just a D&D game, because you've got the sort of Stranger Things D&D manual at the end. Personally, maybe that was just thrown in there to get that theory going. Personally, I don't buy into that as being the whole show was just D&D. My mum had actually mentioned that beforehand. Do you think he'll, like, the final shot will just be them panning out and it's like, oh, that was a great D&D game. I honestly don't think that's the thing. I think that was probably put in there either just because it's like a cool visual. Stranger Things, D&D, they've done a lot for each other. And obviously D&D, like, a massive part of the show, and that final scene has a lot to do with D&D and, like, passing on the torch to the next generation, all that jazz. I don't think it was all just a D&D campaign, but again, that like, you sort of decide the finale interpretational sense with the whole, like, do you believe Ella's alive? Like, personally didn't work amazingly for me, but on the whole, I did really like this finale. As I mentioned, great action, great character development. It's just a shame that there are some things I do still find myself nitpicking at, like certain sequences could have been a bit longer or maybe a bit shorter. The boss fight could have been a bit longer, and I felt like we did need a definitive death in there. And as I keep saying, the whole interpretational thing personally didn't work that well for me. But on the whole, I gave this, on Letterboxd, I gave this 3.5 stars. So that is 7 out of 10. So pretty solid. Probably my least favourite of the finales, as I said, which is disappointing, but it's still a very good episode. It had a lot to deal with, and you can pick faults with the fact that there were so many characters that up to this point, they'd built up so many characters by this point, and you can poke flaws with that. There's certainly a case to be argued there for that criticism, but I think at the end of the day, most of those characters were handled very well. That's the other thing. A few characters are just sort of abandoned. Like the teacher, Mr. Clark, he's just sort of, he's out, he's gone. Murray just doesn't really get a goodbye. There's a few things that just go unmentioned, but on the whole, yeah, you can poke fun at the amount of characters, but I think the characters are actually dealt with really well the whole way through the show, and most of them get their credit in this finale. But those are only my thoughts on this episode of Stranger Things, the grand finale. And of course, later this year, it looks like we're going to be getting Stranger Things Tales of 85, which animation looks cool. Not convinced we need a spin-off middle of the show. They've put it during a good era of the show, but I don't know what to think of it. We'll see. We'll just have to wait and see for that to come out. But I want to hear, what do you think of this episode of Stranger Things? You can email the show at hwsnapbreakpodcast@gmail.com, or you can leave your comments in either the Spotify comment section or the YouTube comment section, whichever you're listening on. For now, though, I've been Bendigo Blue. This has been a Hungry Capybara production. Hellfire lives. See you soon. Stay safe. Bye-bye.